Today, we're looking at Robert Oster's Ever Green. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Robert Oster's Ever Green is a green ink, which is what you would expect with a name like Evergreen. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen per day. I then put it into a D-like Alpha. I don't know. A D-like Alpha with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, immediately dunk it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And this ink flees. It runs up the page, leaving only the lightest hint of a green behind, and then the green comes in, little bits of yellow, and the blue at the top. Very nice looking. Those color ranges sort of give you a little idea of what to expect perhaps while writing with it. Now the one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And it looks exactly the same. The good news about that is I don't expect this ink to take very much at all to clean out of my pen. I think it has no resistance. And resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it handles it pretty well. Now it does spread and go from being an extra fine to a fine-ish towards medium, but everything is legible. It did not make my writing go away, which makes me feel safe using this in a writing environment where I need to highlight my notes later. In a writing environment. I don't even know what that means. Looking at the water, surprisingly, it did not pull as much up as would be expected. It pulled all the heavy greens and left some of the lighter greens behind, but as much of it is there, I see some of the dots of the Rhodia paper coming through that little bit of green. I think with a little more than 30 seconds on the paper, it would remove a whole lot more. But that being said, looking at pen flush definitely removed more of this ink than the water did. We start to get the hints of the white of the paper coming through. That makes me feel that the most you would ever need is pen flush to get this out of your pen. The bleach solution completely removes it, as would be expected. Don't use bleach to get this ink out of your pen. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with a realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Robert Oster's Ever Green has a viscosity of 1.64, making it very wet. Not just kind of wet, very wet. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Robert Oster's Ever Green has an average dry time of 19 seconds. So despite it being a very wet flowing ink, it dries on the higher normal side, but still normal dry times. Now let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing sample consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and it brings the shade. It brings the shade big time, all the time. It's just glorious. Glorious. Same sets of tones with the extra fine. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Yes, shading all over the place. And only 12 seconds to dry. It's such a nice color. A nice tone of green. And look at the shading that we get all over it in every word. It's great. Medium, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Shading all over the place with no problem. The same tone of green that we're getting with the extra fine. Only 19 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine lied and said we don't get color variation, because we did. And the medium shows a color variation that we got. The medium's looking lighter on camera. In person, I'm getting a lot of the same. So I don't know why it's showing up medium or lighter on camera for the medium. The smear test says, I don't know that you could recover it. So I look at this with Tomoe River. Now it looks like it's going to bleed through in the scrubbies, but that's where I put it on stupid thick. So we ignore it. No bleeding. Yes, we get ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, it has halo. It has a lovely halo the whole way through. It has no sheen, and it shows no shading. Not with the 1.1. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Some light shading. We see it go from the mid to dark. It gets darker on the G. We see it go mid on F, darker on O, lighter on X. The jumps goes from lighter to darker straight down the word. So we do get some light shading. Very nice gradual shading through the extra fine. 17 seconds to dry. I think it's very worth it for this ink on this paper. The medium, same tone. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Light shading again. Very light shading all over. The beginning of Q it is darker and then it gets lighter, and the word quick gets darker at the K. Brown starts darker and gets lighter, gets darker again. Fox starts lighter, gets darker. Very nice shading going on with this on Tomoe River. 39 seconds to dry. Totally worth it. The scrubby for the extra fine lies. It shows no color variation, but we do see some color variation with the extra fine. The medium shows color variation, which we got. The smear test, you don't get to recover it when you write on Tomoe River. So we look at Rhodia, which gives us no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Bring forth the shading. It shades everywhere. We get lovely shading through the 1.1. When we go to the extra fine, we get the same tone of green with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. And yes, very nice shading throughout it. Not an aggressive shading, a very nice gradual shading the whole time. Quick, the I is darker than the U or the C. The K is darker than the C. With Fox, the beginning of F is darker. It gets lighter in the center. The X gets darker again. We see that kind of behavior all the way through. It's just not a jump in shading. It doesn't just cross a line of being here's the first line and the second line's over, and where they cross it's super dark. It doesn't have that. It grades itself into its shading. It's very nice. 9 seconds to dry. The medium, the shading is entirely different, but it brings on that shade. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Shading all over. This is where it gets some of that more stark shading that it can get, where it's more dramatic in its change. The J to U gets more dramatic a change in tone. The D to O in dog gets a more dramatic change in tone. R to O in brown gets a more dramatic change in tone. We get plenty of great shading this whole way through. Only 15 seconds to dry. The scrubby showed us a ton of color variation. We got a ton of color variation, and I think you might be able to recover this. So let's see what yellow Rhodia does to it. The yellow Rhodia has no bleeding, no ghosting. What about those colors? Colors are very much the same. Yes, we do see them lighten up a little bit. It's like an even lightening of the tone for the 1.1 extra fine and the medium. It's an even lightening of the tone. But sometimes that lighter paper takes away a little bit of the subtle shading that goes on, and we do see a little bit of that occur here. So with the 1.1, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and we really don't get to see the shading go on here. We don't get to really see it with the 1.1. Now with the extra fine, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We do get shading. We get the same kind of really subtle gradation from darker into lighter on the shading here. So it doesn't jump out at you as the shade, but with certain letters definitely seem to pop off the page some. 10 seconds to dry. Now the medium got affected the most through this this yellow paper. It had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We did lose the shading on the yellow paper because it took away the lighter tones. And that's just an unfortunate thing that does happen with some yellow paper. Still a very nice green ink, 15 seconds to dry. The extra fine scrubby shows us some color variation, and we got it. The medium shows us no color variation, and we didn't get it. The smear tested it here, though. I don't think you could recover this one. So Leuchtturm paper. Leuchtturm gave us no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and the shade's back. The shading is back, and it's nice. This looks really nice on here. I really enjoy the Evergreen here. It's very, very nice. Noticeably lighter tone with the extra fine. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and yes, shading all the way through. We get it in quick, where it starts darker, gets lighter, and gets darker again, and I love when ink does that. When it changes on a word, that's great. And it's really that nice, subtle, all the way through to, if you're looking at the value chart of a color where it starts at white and works to black, and you watch how it transitions through the grays, that's what I'm talking about with the subtle shading, and that's what we have right up here. 7 seconds to dry. Now the medium, a noticeably darker tone. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. We don't get any shading with the Leuchtturm paper. It only took 10 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine showed us the color variation we could expect, and we got it. The medium shows no color variation, and we didn't get it. The smear test says you likely don't get to recover this. So hey, for fun, let's look at 20-pound copier paper. There's a surprise ending at the end of the story. It's being able to read the end of the story on the blank page, because it completely bleeds through. No fault of the ink, it's the paper. Sometimes you hope to find an ink that will perform well on this paper. This was not it. We had bleeding, we had ghosting. That was a medium at the top. That's a medium nib. It just, that ink swam outward in every direction, and after it spread from about a medium to a double broad, it feathered. It didn't have any halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine went down at the same tone. It did the same thing. It swam out as far as it could and turned that medium into, I'm gonna call it more than a medium, almost a broad. It feathers all over. It's tiny little feathering though. Actually, this is not the worst in the world. I think if you had to write on this, and you just make sure that you write really big, bib. I think if you just make sure that you write really big, let's actually write big, then it's not going to be such a problem. But this is a medium nib. That is crazy amounts of spread. And look at that. It goes straight through to the other side. 1 second to dry though, so it's got that going for it. That's all I have for the writing sample. I mean, the scrubby shows color variation. It lied. The smear test, at least it doesn't smear. That's all I got for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Robert Oster's Ever Green, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Diamine's Merlot because it is a great magenta ink. And this is a case where you could have two absolutely spectacular colors going together and not interrupting each other. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Robert Oster's Ever Green? I think the tone is fantastic, and it brings the shade no matter what nib and what paper you use. This ink is amazing as a green ink. Now, I like green inks, but this one is fantastic. Thanks for watching.